Hey guys, it's Ella and welcome to Les Difficulties group lesson 11. And our historical tidbit for this week is Gothic nightlife, or the drinking culture, which would have existed in both the Ostrogothic kingdom and Visigothic Spain and probably Gothic Crimea as well. So, there seems to have been a big divide between barbarian and Roman drinking patterns, with the former drinking beer, cervisia, and the latter drinking wine, or vinum. We have vinum loaned into the Gothic language as ween, actually. So that's a little fun fact for you. In Roman times, drinking vessels would commonly have been made of glass and would have had painted designs, but glass production declined significantly as the Western Empire fell, meaning that we end up with more earthenware vessels of this kind being produced and drunk from in the time period. So, in order to understand Gothic sort of taverns, pubs, the culture involved, we basically have to look to Roman models because, with the exception of Recepolis in Spain, and there's one possible military camp which King Theodoric might have founded in Italy, which later turned into a city, we have very little in the way of new architectural projects embarked upon by the Visigothic or the Ostrogothic kings, and this isn't especially a condemnation of them because it's not just them. In England, in France, under the Merovingians, like the kings of the migration era and of the early medieval period don't seem to have built many new cities. Rather, they were sort of and clinging to and slash or renovating former Roman settlements. And this would have been the case in regards to taverns. So rather than the invading Gothic armies of King Theodoric or King Alaric coming in and creating new taverns where Goths were sort of running it, in Visigothic Spain and Ostrogothic Italy, Gothic soldiers coming in would most likely have just been doing their drinking in Roman pubs. So it's to Roman pubs that we should look for models of what a Gothic pub would have been like, such as this tavern from Pompeii. And there were two kinds of taverns mentioned in Roman literature. So we have these things called copone, or these like more seedy sort of taverns, calpone, or the more dignified taverne. And one of the big differences is you could buy a greater variety of food in a taverna, and you could also stay the night, whereas you couldn't in a calpona. So those are your two distinctions. Here is a really cool little bit of epigraphy that we have surviving. So we have a tavern menu from Roman Italy, which is now housed in a museum, I believe, in Naples, and it shows the foods they would have had available. So you could literally point to, like, I want that off of the menu. So what in cena pollum piscem pernam pavonem venatores. So it literally means hunters, which is presumably what they're referring to their customers, which I find very interesting. Hunters, we have chicken, pullum, piscem, fish, pernam, ham, and pavonem, which is peacock. So this is referring to the kinds of things you had available. An interesting feature you might notice is that there aren't prices listed, even though we know from some Roman epigraphic sources, for instance Diocletian's edict on maximum prices, that obviously these were being sold in a monetary economy, and people would have been able to buy these items for coin. But the absence of prices is very interesting, and a fair few historians think that these earlier economies they didn't operate according to a sort of fixed price, universal principle that we understand today. Like when we go into a store, we see items with a sort of fixed price for everybody mentioned, but rather the amount that an individual paid for this would be almost like a bartering, not bartering, sorry, but haggling between themselves and the innkeeper. And we see this reference in the Colloquium Ledense, where the Colloquium Monacensium Undecimum, which is a late antique language learning text, which tells the story of a young boy and his friends going to a restaurant, and they pay at the end, and presumably they're paying just the amount that they deem fair, and an amount that won't get them sort of harangued or attacked by the store owner. So that gives us an interesting insight into what the dynamics and the process of like going into a tavern like this and ordering your food would have been like. One last final note of interest is this: we've got this grain here, and then this sort of cut up circle in the middle. This almost certainly is representing bread. So what it would be is you would have chicken, some fish, some ham, or some peacock served with bread, because Isidore of Seville, the famous sort of last writing in the kingdom, says that bread is so called because it's served with every meal. So that's probably what it would have been like at the time. We can see here in a fresco from Pompeii adverts for different flavors and different brands of wine, which each would have had sort of their own different prices. And although ancient Roman taverns had many different kinds of wine on offer, this is not the case when we get to the 6th century. And the reason for this, we can tell this from Vinidarius' excerpt from Apicius. So this is a text that I call the Ostrogothic cookbook. They are excerpts from the Roman Apicius, which have been altered from their Roman originals because the Ostrogoths did not have the same trade connections as Apicius to obtain spices. So Apicius actually has a long section in book 1 of his cookbook, which outlines several different spiced wine recipes, whereas Vinodarius here lists only 5 liquids as essential, and these are honey, must, reduced wine, pepper sauce, and raisin wine. And you can see the excerpt from the manuscript there. So these are the 5 liquids regards as essential for a kitchen, whereas Apicius had vast numbers of different kinds of alcohol and instructions for how to prepare them. So clearly Vinodarius is expecting a less varied culinary milieu. But notice, interestingly, in Vinodarius that we don't see any mention of beer here. Now, granted, these are liquids that one uses in cooking, so perhaps that's why. Although there are obviously some contemporary recipes today that use beer in cooking as a flavouring ingredient. But, the reason why the reduced wine, these seem to have been the things used in cooking. It doesn't necessarily tell us about drinking, perhaps, but I think it certainly tells us that they had a reduced availability compared to Roman times. So the point of it was that if you were to go into a Roman tavern, you would have had a more variety of foods available to you and drinks available to you than if you went into an Ostrogothic or a Visigothic tavern. Here is a fresco from Pompeii showing some fine silverware on which the Roman elite would have dined. And granted, the Ostrogothic and Visigothic elite, the noble kings, probably would have dined on similarly fine Tupperware as well. Tupperware, weird way to silverware as well. But your average Goth probably would not have been able to afford this. They would have been eating on Roman Samian ware, which has finally loaded up. This is a really dirt cheap kind of pottery. You find it all around, and it's so ubiquitously Roman that when we get in far-flung places, we sort of take it as evidence of Ostrogothic travel. In fact, one of the evidences we have for early Roman contact with Ireland. And although Ireland was certainly never colonized, it seems that there was some trade of Roman goods to early medieval Ireland during the time, but ancient Ireland during the time of the Roman Empire, and we can tell this from finds of pottery like this in Ireland, but that's a unrelated tangent. And here we have some more ordinary Roman fare. This is granted from a site in Roman Britain, but this is the sort of eating and drinking paraphernalia which would have been very commonplace in any tavern in the Roman Empire, including therefore a tavern in Ostrogothic or Visigothic kingdoms. And you will notice this cup here, which is almost certainly a drinking cup. These plates for food you might eat. This glass jar, which would have had maybe a kind of table condiment, who knows. And down here in the left-hand corner, we have these bone gaming pieces, because we know from frescoes and other such that gaming was quite a popular pastime that would happen in these pubs. So unfortunately, we don't really have the rules of any such games recorded in quite explicit terms, but we do know of one which is referenced quite often called Lulus Latrum Colorum, which is the game of petty thieves, and it was especially popular using tiles like in the previous slide. And actually, there are a fair few applications you can download for your phone which lets you play against a computer. It's quite fun. Here is another one, a fresco from Pompeii, showing two men playing dice games on this tabula, this like board that is held, which seems to actually be supported on each other's legs. They seem to be sitting on stools, and the board is held up by both of their legs, which is quite interesting when you think about it. It means that, well, they both have to be relatively still when they're playing, and then also symbolically it sort of means that the game sort of relies on their mutual cooperation, which might be threatened by the captions in this particular piece, which is just so charming, because the one on the left says out, and or you're out, and the one on the right says no, it's 3 twos, and presumably that means that he has not in fact lost the game. So maybe the one on the left, after this picture was drawn, sort of stood up and threw off the board and walked out in anger, not wanting to play anymore. This is just another one that's like the cutest thing. It's so human. I'm here for it. So this is another fresco from Pompeii. It shows a waiter in white who seems to be a woman, actually. Like it looks like a woman, and you may notice from the sort of slight crisscrossing in her hair, it looks like she's wearing hairnet, actually. Very interesting. And she comes over and she asks, who ordered this? So the man in red, who is the furthest left, he points to this other guy in green and says, it's him. And the man in green says, it's not mine. So a really classic case of somebody's prepared the wrong order in a tavern, just like we'd have today. It's so charming. I'm here for it. I'm absolutely here for it. We can see also in the Gothic language, trying to bring this back more specifically to what the Ostrogothic and Visigothic experiences would have been like, while meal names in Gothic seem to be native and reflect sort of native orderings of the day. So we have Morgenmats, which is breakfast, and Nachtemats, which is dinner, and Undornemats, which is, again, I think like breakfast or lunch. They seem to have borrowed certain approaches from the Romans, and we can see this in the word anacumbion, which comes as a loan word from recumbere in Latin, which means to recline, as the Romans in the fresco do, because both, it seems, at taverns and at sort of fancy private meals, the I guess elite method of dining would not be to sit down at a table, but actually you'd be lying down on these sofas that these people are lying on. And these, in Latin they're called a triclinia, for these like reclining areas, and people would have a table in the middle, like you see here, with food and drink on, and they would eat over the day, they would talk, and you would have little servants like this boy here in red bringing food and water back and forth. So this goes to show that like Roman methods of dining seem to have rubbed off on the Goths as well. Here is another example of Roman dining. This is from a depiction of an agape feast, and the woman is toasting and saying a common early Christian toast, agape misce nobis. It means sort of divine love sort of mixes together, which I find very endearing as a thing. And this guy here actually is saying purge, so like, so purge oneself, get rid of it. Maybe he's referring to vomiting. It's hard to say. It's quite interesting stuff. And we can see not just women but also men and children eating and drinking together at this feast. Very egalitarian. It's quite charming. And that's it.